Welcome back. Good morning once again. This is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk, Mississippi. We are glad to be with you. Want to join the conversation? You may do just that on the C Spire text line, 601-879-4395. Give your business the edge with gigabit fiber internet from C Spire. Thanks for being with us this morning, and thanks to our first guest this morning. Glenn Antizzo, professor of political science at Mississippi College, joining us in studio. Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning.
Appreciate you joining us as well. You probably heard before the break, we were talking about this report that has come from the subcommittee that did the coronavirus research. There are a couple of points, and we don't necessarily have to talk about cover-up and all that good stuff. There are a couple of points I didn't get to before the break, and one of these, this is notable, let's say, extensive findings that this committee discovered and has since released. This feels like an important one. The Constitution cannot be suspended in times of crisis, and restrictions on freedoms now sow distrust in public health. Mm-hmm. That seems like a reasonable finding. You can't just suspend the Constitution because there's a pandemic.
Yeah, no, a lot of countries have emergency provisions in their Constitution. The United States is not one of them. And you're right. I mean, you cannot cannot step outside the Constitution, even though you have a serious crisis. You're correct.
I think there's a pretty serious point here as well that actually makes you think a little bit. The prescription cannot be worse than the disease, such as strict and overly broad lockdowns that led to predictable anguish and avoidable consequences. The prescription cannot be worse than the disease itself. I think that's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah.
In there.
No, I think, obviously there was panic in the government at the time, worry about the unknown, people sort of grasping at straws to try to grapple with this crisis. And, it's particularly, tragic knowing that, this report has found that at least theoretically this is a completely avoidable crisis because it was engineered in a lab and escaped from it, from a country that, does engage in biological warfare research.
Yeah. And research that was partially at least funded by the United States. And then there was an attempt to cover it up by the Chinese government, parts of the American government, and the international scientific community. It's like, what was the motive? What was the motive?
To cover up. Obviously, a tremendous embarrassment over something that, unleashed a worldwide pandemic that we're still dealing with the after effects of. I had COVID earlier this semester. I had COVID for the third time thanks to this.
Yeah. Brian Haydad, who I work with in the afternoon, has COVID, and I told him, I was like, "That's so 2020. That's still a thing? What are you doing? What are you doing?" I think this is maybe a larger political science question, and I don't know that it will ever happen. Why is it that we haven't or can't hold China accountable?
That is a great question, and I think a lot of it is that we don't want to disturb relations. You have a very and I use the word guardedly because of the context I'm using it in, but a very conservative administration in the sense that it does not want to rock the boat. China is a rising power. Right now, we are in what we would call in political science a period of unipolarity. In other words, you've got one great power, that would be the United States. But we are also in a period of what is often called, and I hated this term when I was in graduate school, but it is apropos, and that is, we're in a period of relative, son of a gun, I can't think of the name words now, relative decline. That's it. And so what's happening is not that American power is deflating, but that the people behind us are coming up, are getting closer to us. Yeah. It's like you're in a track meet, and the guy who's behind you is catching up to you. So your lead is shrinking. And China is that power that's sort of nipping at our heels right now, and we're worried about doing anything that is going to provoke the Chinese. But the thing is, though, you can't conduct foreign policy that way, in my opinion. It seems to me that what you need to do is be, calling out China when they do stuff like this. Put them on the defensive. I think a lot of this revolves around trade relations and strategic relations vis-a-vis, the military situation in the Far East. China is one of our biggest trade partners, so we don't want to upset the apple cart on that. After all, what would Walmart stock if they didn't have anything from China? And and as far as the strategic situation in the Pacific, we're worried about China making all this noise about possibly invading Taiwan. And I disagree with the administration's approach in this. I think you do take the dictators on a bit more. And I would want to make the Chinese more worried about what our reaction is going to be rather than worrying about what their reaction is going to be when we call them out on their shenanigans.
Yeah, and I don't know that there will ever be any way to fully quantify the amount of money that the COVID pandemic cost the United States. Yeah. It is in the trillions of dollars. It's incalculable, calculable. So how do you hold China financially responsible for some of the financial burden that the United States is having to bear? I mean, we look at the overall deficit and where it is. I've just quick Google search. China does not hold as much U.S. debt as we have been led to believe. It's less than $1 trillion out of a $38 trillion deficit at this point. I mean, I feel like we've been led to believe that half of our debt is being held by China, right. So we are completely slave to them, and that's just not true. It's spread out all over the place. We owe lots of countries lots of money, but is there a way politically that you can hold China financially responsible for this?
You would probably have to do it through sanctions,
which feels like a really tenuous idea. Agreed. Otherwise, there is an international court of justice, but unfortunately, when you take your arguments to the International Court of Justice, there's no enforcement power. So even if you were to win your case, it's mostly for propaganda purposes. There's not really much else you can do. I'm afraid the Chinese are going to get away with this one because there's really nothing we can do. Switching gears, but I think kind of tied to the same piece. The debate over tariffs was such a political hot button issue during the election season, and Democrats screamed and screamed and screamed about Donald Trump wrecking the economy through tariffs. I always thought that this was a tool as opposed to a threat,
right?
A tool in the toolbox, and we're already seeing some dividends from that. Most recently, the meeting at Mar-a-Lago, in which Justin Trudeau and the delegation from Canada came down, and they were like, you can't do this to us. He has gotten the attention of world leaders through this threat of imposing tariffs. How does that play out?
No, I agree with you. My understanding is also that the Mexicans have sort of, come around on this as well. And you're right. I think it's more of a tool than it is an actual threat. The last time around, he threatened a lot of the stuff and did not go through with it when he got what he wanted. My understanding is also that I saw a headline. I didn't have a chance to read the full article, but my understanding is that Mexican public opinion is getting a little tired of migrants coming through the country.
Yeah.
And so between the threats that Trump is making, particularly towards Mexico, and changing public opinion in Mexico, you may see the Mexican government decide that perhaps the best policy is to strengthen their border with Guatemala and keep people from using their country as a transit point.
I think that's an incredible point. I read part of that story this morning, and it had to do with the plight of the Mexican people dealing with migrants who are coming through their country.
Right.
And as bad as it is with people coming to the United States, they're coming to the United States and they're trying to settle. And so maybe there's, at least in some cases, some level of decorum with the way in which they live. Mexico's just a pass-through. They care nothing about what they do to the communities as they come through, as they leave behind. And the Mexican people's opinion of this migrant influx that they are dealing with, and it's it's from Central American countries, and it's from all over the world. It's having a drain on them.
Yeah, no, this is not, just brother and sister Latinos coming through the country to seek a better life in the United States. As you correctly pointed out, it's people coming in from all over the world. My understanding is, for example, I think it's Peru that really does not have any immigration controls. You don't. I think you don't need a visa, if I remember correctly. So people are using that as a place to fly to and then come this way. And Nicaragua, which, make no mistake, the government there is hostile to the United States. The guy who is the president there right now is the communist dictator that Reagan helped oust during the 1980s. That guy is also allowing his country to be an entry point for people from all over the world. And to the extent that you are seeing, criminal aliens entering the United States, I would not be the least bit surprised to find out that they're coming from Nicaragua.
Wouldn't be, I agree with you, wouldn't be surprised at all. Daniel Ortega, the president of Nicaragua, who is absolutely a dictator. Feels like that's using the term president pretty loosely.
Yes.
We got more with Glenn Antizzo, professor of political science at Mississippi College, when we come back. This is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. Thanks for being with us on... What is today? Tuesday. This Tuesday morning, the 3rd of December. Glenn, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving week.
Yeah, no, it started off with a little bit of a family tragedy. We had my stepfather passed away on election day.
So sorry.
And so I had to go home to New York to help arrange for his funeral and square away a few things. But we got back, and we had a really great Thanksgiving with friends here in Clinton, where we live. And then I'm an LSU alum. I got to be in Tiger Stadium to watch my Tigers beat Oklahoma. So that was great.
There you go. Glenn Antizzo, professor of political science at Mississippi College. We're kind of bouncing around and hitting a bunch of different topics this morning. I will give you the choice. Do you want to talk pardons, or do you want to talk cabinet appointees?
Let's start with pardons, and we can work our way over to cabinet appointees. How's that sound?
Goodness. We get the news. We get the news on Sunday night that Hunter Biden will be pardoned.
Right.
I don't think, at least for most, that this was terribly surprising, despite the fact that President Biden himself and all of his mouthpieces and all of the media folks on the left not only said that he wouldn't pardon his son, but they talked about the moral high ground. That may not be the right way, by choosing not to pardon. He just wasn't going to do that because it wasn't the right thing to do, and then he did it.
Well, remember, this was the president who was going to save democracy and preserve the rule of law by making sure that Trump stayed out of the White House, and he was going to resign, and it was the patriotic thing to do. Until, of course, he started using the powers in a legal way, but I think in an ethically highly questionable way, to pardon his son. If the whole idea is that nobody is above the law, ... except my son, I think this is going to put a stain on his presidency. I think it may be, some people have suggested that this is setting the stage for him to also pardon his brother.
Yeah.
And
I don't think there's any question there.
Also, if Trump decides that he's going to pardon people who, were involved in the January 6th riots or anything else, I think it's going to be really hard to claim the moral high ground on this and say, no, he can't do that. Because, there you got. By the way, it's going to be hard for Democrats to argue about gun control anymore when one of these things was a gun charge.
I said yesterday, and you may agree or disagree with this, and that's fine, the pardon based on the actual pending charges, the gun charge and the tax case, that bothers me far less than the time window and the blanket that goes along. I mean, if you go back to the Trump pardons that happened when he was in office between 16 and 20, they were specific, right? They were specific in nature, and this is just, anything he did, anything he's been charged with, anything he might have done that he hasn't been charged with, this covers it all. And that's concerning because of some of the interaction that very clearly is there with foreign governments and the enrichment of the Biden family.
Right. Yeah. No, you make a really great point. First of all, is my understanding that these cover about a decade.
Yeah.
And, people were critical of.
And by the way, they coincide with the time right before he was put on the board at Burisma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was just about to make that point. I mean, it basically buries any avenue to go after Biden himself, because you would have to get that information. The information would have probably been derived from testimony during Hunter's trial, and he would have to explain, for example, who the big guy is, and now those avenues of investigation are largely, blocked through the legal system. Also, the time period, Richard, which you pointed out, is extraordinarily long. Covers a lot of sins, because it's not just a pardon for any crime he actually has been charged with, but it's any crime he may have committed during that time period. Now, Gerald Ford paid a tremendous political price in 1976 for pardoning Richard Nixon. I think that along with stagflation, but I think that was the big issue in the 76 elections. And but what Nixon was pardoned for in terms of the volume of crime, because Nixon was not involved in the Watergate break-in. He was involved in a criminal conspiracy to cover up and block the investigation into it. This is a lot more serious because it covers a lot more ground. And obviously, he's doing this at the end. It may be a way of sort of flipping off the establishment, as a spiteful, parting shot that, I feel like I got done over by my party and by the American people, and now I'm just going to do what I want. I do understand on the level that you want to protect your kid. I get that. But at the same time, I mean, if your whole premise for running, because this is what it was when he was still in the campaign, was that you were going to preserve the rule of law, and then you do this, you're a hypocrite.
Not the first time that Joe Biden has done something that is hypocritical in nature.
And then all of these people who have to wipe egg off their face at MSNBC and Karine Jean-Pierre, who were carrying this guy's water for months, and if it turns out that this was actually in the works a lot more than just Sunday, with, I presume, Dr. Jill probably prodding him to do it, it's going to be a lot worse. I mean, this could do some, not just serious damage to his legacy, but I think some damage to an extent to the Democratic Party as well.
Is there a scenario, and this is, forgive me if this sounds like a conspiracy theory, is there a scenario where Hunter Biden forced his dad's hand and said, "Hey, I get that you don't want to do this, but you're going to have to do this, or I'm just going to let it all fly"?
Wow. I hadn't thought about that, but that's entirely possible. It's
there was a point in Succession, I don't know if you watched it, where the kids kind of turned on Dad.
Yeah, no, actually, I always think of, and part of it I think is because the looks are similar, the looks of the actor and the real life person. I always thought of Hunter Biden as a second tier Jamie Dutton. And so
that's really good.
And so that kind of stuff wouldn't surprise me. To be honest with you, Richard, I thought what was going to happen was that there was going to be sort of a backdoor quid pro quo. Sorry, it's early. Between Trump and Biden, that Biden would issue a pardon for Trump, and then Trump would turn around and pardon Hunter Biden. And for Trump, it actually might have been a good thing to do it if you wanted to sort of, say, well, I'm reaching out and I'm trying to bring the country back together. I believe the guy is guilty, but, like Gerald Ford said about Richard Nixon, we need to put the wounds behind us and move on. So
similar to what Donald Trump said about not prosecuting Hillary Clinton once he was in office. He thought it was bad for the country.
Right. So I thought that's where we were probably going to go with this. I got to admit I was a bit surprised that Biden went ahead and did this. And to be honest with you, I would have thought he'd maybe do it a little bit closer to being out the door rather than allowing this to fester for the next, 48 days?
So there was a theory that's floating around, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, that maybe this was a mistake because, in theory, because he cannot be convicted of a crime or he is pardoned for a crime, there is no use for or reason for Fifth Amendment protection. And if Hunter Biden was called to testify before Congress and then was found to be lying, it would be after the pardon ran out and might have to answer honestly. Have you heard that theory floated?
No.
Do you know if there's any legal basis to it?
Boy, that's a great question. No, I've not heard that the theory. It's an interesting theory. I've not heard that floated before. I'm not sufficiently well versed to comment on that, but it is interesting to think about.
Yeah, I was trying to see if I had this. I saved it somewhere, but it was Friedman. I can't remember which one floated it out there, but that maybe it was not the best decision because, what are you taking the Fifth for? You can't get in trouble, and so you got to tell us the truth. And if you don't tell us the truth, you're perjuring yourself against Congress, and your pardon ran out on. Anyway, going to be interesting to see where this goes. These cabinet appointments. We'll talk about this in the final segment of the show. There is a real fight that is coming on a lot of these. Which ones are going to get through? Which ones are not going to get through? We will ask the professor that on the other side of this timeout. Glenn Antizzo, our guest for Mississippi College, professor of political science there. We got more coming up with you. We'll wrap up the 7 o'clock hour next. This is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk, Mississippi. Wrapping up the 7 o'clock hour with our guest, Glenn Antizzo, Mississippi College professor of political science, always kind with his time and always enjoy the conversations. We've got these cabinet nominations, pending appointments. The most recent that seems to be filled with controversy is that of Kash Patel to lead the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He has talked about wanting to kind of dismantle / rebuild that organization. There are some senators who have been very open to the idea of Kash Patel, saying that the whole place needs to be cleaned out. And there are others that have been like, hold on now, we may not need to go down this road, or we've got to hear it all out. What's your take on Kash Patel's nomination as FBI director?
That was a news to me. I was a bit out of the loop because of everything that went on with my life the last week. But, without commenting on Patel specifically, I will say that, the FBI has been, it appears, and this goes back about 8 years, seems to have gotten politicized.
James Comey.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking of. And so, I think there is reason to believe that maybe not, the field agents themselves who do a good job, but, people in management maybe need to be cleaned out and get some fresh faces in there that perhaps it has become politicized.
When you hear politicians or commentators talk about the deep state, do you roll your eyes or do you perk your ears?
Sort of a little mix of both. I do think that there probably are people in certain aspects of government who, because they are, careerists, have their own way of doing things, and they look at the elected officials that are their, at least constitutionally their boss, as temporary occupants of the White House, and that they know best. And so, I could see where that argument would be made. I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist in the sense that, I still believe in the system. I still believe that most people working in government are, hardworking people that, are doing what they think is best, and they observe the orders of their bosses, and they are, doing the rule of law. Of course, so you could ask whether their bosses, and I'm talking about their institutional bosses, the ones that are appointed and or have worked their way up through civil service,
right.
Are they giving orders that are ethical and or legal?
Yeah. I don't think this falls into the conspiracy theory category, but it is interesting that seemingly we have not actually had a president for the last year.
Yeah, no, that's
and
not
yet
a conspiracy.
The country has just kind of kept on functioning and has lent some credence to the argument that, hey, it's going to run itself whether there's a president there or not.
Yeah, no, you are absolutely right. I've raised that question myself. You look at especially after Vice President Harris got the nomination. She's out on the campaign trail. Not that she was actually doing anything when she was vice president, but she's out on the campaign trail doing her thing, running for office. And you barely even see the president. He's being shielded. The only time you see him is when he's sunning himself on a beach in Delaware, or he's getting an ice cream cone, and you're not even sure who's really running the show. Now, there's some precedent for this, and there was, when I was in college and graduate school, some theory that Reagan's mental health was starting to decline, and we all know that he ended up being diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and that Nancy Reagan may have, during the last 2 years, between 87 and 89, been making a lot of the shots getting called. But in this case, I think you are absolutely right that the president has been MIA. He gives an angry speech every now and then where he repeats the same cliches, and then that's it. I don't know. I mean, for the past year, Richard, I think you're absolutely right. We've had a man in lieu of a president occupying the Oval Office, and I'm not really clear on exactly who's running the show. And there really hasn't been anything big, praise God, that has happened in the last few months that have, created some sort of an existential crisis for the country. But that's by the grace of God. What would have happened if a big international crisis had broken out? You did have the crisis.
I mean, you kind of get the deal going on in the Middle East,
right? Yeah, but I mean,
and the war in Ukraine.
Right, yeah, but I mean, the Israelis were basically, I think, been ignoring Biden and just doing what they want to do, which is what they should do. It's their national security that's at stake. And to be honest with you, it's good for them that they're ignoring things coming out of the White House because, as usual, the United States is making countries facing existential threats fight with one hand tied behind their back because that's what American presidents make our armed forces do.
Always good to see that note that another $715 billion is going to Ukraine to help with munitions before the end of the year. So more money heading overseas, which Biden told us that. Said they're going to spend every dollar they possibly could spend while in office to help Ukraine. Yeah. So we are out of time, Glenn. We'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your time. Always a great visit.
Thank you, Richard. Glad to be here.
Glenn Antizzo, professor of political science, Mississippi College. Got a quick break for the news, then the 8 o'clock hour with you on the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi.